Hi everyone, this is Chefy Things. I'm Chef Kortney McMillian, and today we're making soft yeast rolls. So to begin, we're going to go over a little bit of our equipment that we're going to utilize as well as our ingredients. All right, so first off, let's talk about our equipment. So you will definitely need a scale. We utilize the scale versus using measuring cups as it is more precise and you will get consistent turnout on products. It is fairly inexpensive. At most, you can find it for 15 to 20 bucks off of Amazon or your local grocery store, depending on. One of my favorite tools, or actually two favorite tools of mine, is a bench scrape that we'll utilize to divide our dough. Bowl scrape to make sure everything's nice and scraped out. Of course, we need to make sure we utilize and grab every little bit of our ingredients because prices are a little expensive. We have some rubber spatulas to utilize, a pastry brush. This is a silicone pastry brush. I like it just because you can get it nice and clean. You don't have to worry about submerging the fibers as well. For fermenting our dough, which we'll go into that a little bit further, you'll need some sort of container for it to rise and double inside. So for today's purpose, we're using a container that you can actually kind of visually see that growth of the dough, but if you don't have that, just use a regular stainless steel mixer bowl. And also one of the most important things is a KitchenAid mixer or some sort of stand mixer. If you do not have that, you can go ahead and just use some elbow grease and get in there and be a little extra needy about it. Also with our equipment, we will need some baking sheets and some parchment paper for whenever these rolls are ready to be baked into the oven, ready to be baked. So first off, we have some salt. We have some softened butter right here. I'm using unsalted so I can truly control the amount of salt that's going into a recipe. Some cane sugar, some instant yeast, which we'll talk a little bit about yeast. I know it can be intimidating, but I promise you it's quite simple. We have some eggs, we have some milk, some water, and then some flour. So I am currently using a mixture between bread flour and all-purpose flour. You can choose to use both or either or. Bread flour just has a higher protein content to help with gluten structure and development. If you don't have that on hand or you don't want to buy an extra flour, all-purpose is still a way to go. Also, I'm using a little bit of nonstick spray. I just prefer to have this mixture right here. It's nice and refillable and kind of saves some money. So those are our ingredients. Now let's get on to talking a little bit more about our process with yeast and begin the mixing. So let's talk a little bit about yeast. So we're using instant dry active yeast. It is the most user-friendly yeast readily available at your local grocery store. This is very nice because you can usually just mix it in with your ingredients and not have to worry about the activation process whenever you choose to go with active dry yeast or something different, which there is a ton of yeast in the air, which that's a whole separate video to talk about sourdough starters and all kind of natural yeast that's occurring within the world. But with this, it's nice and easy to utilize. I'm going to actually take and bloom it into our liquid just to make sure it disperses nice and evenly throughout our mixer. That is not necessarily, if you want to just dump everything in, you can go ahead and do that. But for today, I'm going to take and mix it together with our milk and our water, which they're about room temperature. You can do a little bit warmer temperature of water. Just be careful to not get over 138 degrees, as that is the temperature that'll actually kill yeast. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix in my yeast, kind of agitate it to let it bloom. So yeast can actually be inactive for quite some time at room temperature, but over time it can actually die because it is a living organism. It's a fungi. If you do not use yeast quite as often, you can actually store it in the refrigerator to help with the shelf life of it, or just keep it in a nice airtight container in a cool, dark space. I usually like to keep mine in the back of my pantry, but I'm also buying a pound at a time. So while that sits here, you'll start to see it kind of beginning to foam. So also something important and interesting about this, the yeast actually feeds on the sugars that's found within the milk. So you'll start to see it getting foamy. If you don't see it foaming, you need to see about checking your yeast and making sure it's actually alive. So there's a few different ways to test that. You can get some slightly warm water, a little bit of sugar, and add some yeast to that, mix it together, let it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes. If you don't see any foaming action, maybe it's time that you need to go to the grocery store and get some fresh yeast. So while we let that bubble and bloom, we're gonna take and begin adding our ingredients into our mixer bowl right here. I'm using a stand mixer just because it's a little bit easier. Of course, I'm not advocating that you absolutely have to buy one of these. This was actually a gift from my grandmother, and I have used it very, very much. So first I went in with my sugar. There's not really a rhyme or reason to mixing and adding all of the ingredients in, but there's a little rule that I like to follow. So I'm gonna use this rubber spatula to help get this nice softened butter into there, making sure to get everything out. So that rule that I was talking to you about, yeast and salt, they really like one another. They need one another, but they're actually frenemies. So if they're right next to each other, there's a chance that the salt can actually kill the yeast. So I like to create a little barrier in between. So I'm gonna put my salt in and use my flour as my barrier. And also, whenever you're measuring out all of your ingredients, you can actually take and reuse your bowl that you used for your flour to actually put your final product of dough in for it to rise. But this one's a little too small for the size of batch that we're going to be doing. And I'd like for you all to see the growth that our yeast bread has during the fermentation process. And next up, I'm going to crack one of these eggs to add in. I've allowed my egg to come to room temperature just because it makes it a little bit easier. If you don't have time for that, you can also take and leave your egg uncracked into a bowl and add some nice warm water to it. It'll help bring the temperature up a lot quicker. Add that in. Also, make sure after you crack an egg, go wash your hands. There's salmonella. Nobody is wanting to get sick. And also make sure if you're using this counter or your surface to crack your egg on, make sure to give that a wipe down as well. So let me go wash these hands. So we have almost all of our ingredients into our bowl. As you can see, that egg's just chilling out on the top. Now we're gonna take a look. As you can see, it's starting to get just a little bit foamy. I'm being a little impatient. I know this yeast is nice and fresh because I just got it this morning at the grocery store. So I'm gonna go ahead and dump everything into my bowl right here. Make sure you're scraping and getting everything out. So also something that I forgot to mention earlier, but with this recipe that I've originally utilized dry milk powder. So dry milk powder is where the milk has been basically dehydrated and most of the moisture and water has been taken out. So it's concentrated. Of course, you can rehydrate it. So today I decided to use regular milk just because that is what most people have within their refrigerators versus dry milk powder. I will put the conversion down below as well if you were using dry milk powder or milk, but overall it's about a cup of milk with 4 ounces of water, and all of the measurements will be found in the captions below, correct? For this process in mixing, we're gonna actually use a dough hook. It works with the dough. I always feel like it's like Captain Hook with Peter Pan. So we're gonna use this to help. It's in its name, it's a dough hook. If you're mixing this by hand, you can use a wooden spoon or just get in there with your hands. Your hands are your best tools. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this on. So we're gonna begin mixing on low just to kind of get everything incorporated. This is what we call the pickup stage. So all of the flour is mixing together with the other ingredients. allowing for the absorption to happen with the flour. Also, nobody wants a flour cloud. Might help if the mixer's plugged in. There we go. Now we're cooking. Or would we say baking instead? So in the beginning stage, it's not going to look like it's wanting to come together, but as time continues, it'll begin to pick up. You can also take and stop it halfway through this process. Make sure your mixer's turned off before you do this, but get a rubber spatula or something to scrape down the sides of the bowl to help make sure everything's getting incorporated. So sometimes there's a chance that there will be a small amount of flour at the very bottom of the bowl. Give it just a little bit of time. This beginning stage should mix for about a minute or so. You'll see everything start to come together. So we're at the stage that almost everything has come together. You can move that dough hook around. A small amount of flour left behind. I'm gonna go in there with my rubber spatula, just again to make sure that nothing is getting left or stuck. It is very unfortunate whenever you get a clump of flour at the very bottom of your dough after it is fully mixed, which is what we don't want at all. So now becomes the second stage of mixing, where we will take and begin developing gluten, which we'll talk about that a little bit more as it mixes. We're going to turn the speed up to about between a 4 and 6 on the mixer, or about medium speed. At this stage, you want to make sure that you hang on to your mixer, because sometimes they like to walk away, which is definitely not what you want. And with this process, it'll take between 8 to 10 minutes, and there's some indicators to tell whenever you're ready. Also, if you're mixing this by hand, really get ready to knead. So we're about halfway through the mixing process. It's been going for about 5 minutes. And as you can see, the dough is pulling away from the sides of the bowl. It's really kind of stuck to the dough hook. Of course, me holding it at this angle, it's moving around. Also, some indicators that you can see, it's starting to get smooth, but it's still a little rough. And if you were to press on it, it's not really bouncing back just yet. So the bounce back is an indicator for me and a telltale sign that our gluten is developing at this point, which that helps with the structure and the overall texture of our bread. So we'll continue mixing. We're testing to see if our dough is finished now. So as you can see, with indicating after I push on it, it's a little sticky, but that's okay. During that process, it's bouncing back. So also looking at the dough, once I take this off. So as you can see, it's nice and smooth. They're showing a little bit of structure right here, but I'm gonna go ahead and take it off, kind of round it out, and then I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. Also, the best tool with this is some nice clean hands to help get everything off of that dough hook. Make sure you get every bit. I'm definitely a bread head, so I love bread, so I make sure I get every last bit. So using that bowl scrape to really kind of get in and scoop the sides, this truly is my favorite tool in the kitchen, and probably the least expensive. So before I continue on, I'm gonna go ahead and get my container prepared. So I'm using a little bit of non-stick spray. So in this case, I'm using avocado oil. Make sure, get it in there, get it all nice and coated. That way your dough is not going to stick in as well. You could also take and use flour, but I don't want any more flour to be included in this. All right, because I was a Play-Doh kid and I enjoy playing with the dough, I'm gonna take and kind of tuck it under with that motion just to kind of create some nice tension and a nice smooth surface for us to work with. And you can press on it and you see how it's bouncing back. That is our telltale sign. So now I'm gonna take and place it into our container. Give it a little press down so we can actually see where it is sitting at on our container. And now I'm gonna, you can either put a lid, some plastic wrap, or a towel, tea towel on top, and allow it to rise. And conventionally, whenever you're making yeast bread at home, you would take and just put it in a warm area and allow it to rise and double in size, which could take to an hour, hour and a half, depending on where you're located and how warm it is. And I'm gonna show you an industry trick. So that industry trick that I was telling you about, we call it a proof box. So what that is that it is a nice warm cabinet with some water that creates the humidity necessary for the dough to actually rise by half of the time that it usually takes. So this dough that normally takes an hour to an hour and a half to rise, it only takes 30 minutes. So that speeds up our time so we get those yeast rolls quicker and into our belly. So that trick is that you're gonna take and use your oven. There's multiple ways to do it, but the way that I'm gonna show you guys is we're gonna take and use some boiling water, put it in something that is heat proof and safe. That is then gonna go into the oven with our container, with our dough inside, and we're gonna shut that oven door after that water is poured, and we're gonna allow it to set for about 30 minutes. We'll turn on our oven light so we can check and see without releasing all of that steam. If it needs to go longer, we'll check the temperature of the water, see if we need to add some fresh hot water to it, and let it continue to rise until it's about doubled. So let's get that started. I'm actually gonna walk this over smarter, not harder. All right, see you in 30 minutes. All right, so we're back. As you can see, just by looking at the side of the container, the dough has definitely doubled in size. Now let's take it off and give it a look. So as you can see, it's got a really nice, smooth domed top, and it has definitely doubled in size. So now here comes the fun part. So with slightly damp hands, or you can grab a little bit of oil from the side of the container, you're going to punch down gently. We're not here to like knock anybody out or anything, just a gentle punch to release all of the air, or you can take and fold the sides in to release that carbon dioxide and allow the dough to rest for just about 5 minutes after to let the gluten that we've just reactivated relax a little bit before we begin the shaping process. So and I'm actually going to take and turn my dough out onto my station. And allow it to rest. So while we're waiting for that to rest, let's talk about the pieces of equipment that we're going to utilize for this portion of making yeast rolls. So we're going to need our scale for sure, and then also our handy dandy bench scrape. Also, let's go ahead and get out our 2 cookie sheets and baking pans that we need, lined with parchment, or you could just spray a little bit of nonstick spray onto the actual surface of your tray. I just like the parchment paper because it makes it an easier cleanup. After we get our yeast rolls shaped, we're going to take and place them back onto the trays, and then from there, we're going to allow them to proof. So the second time that they rise is called proofing. So a good little trick that I like to use is that it's proof that it's ready to go into the oven. So it's going to ferment again, and that yeast is going to feed off of the carbohydrates and get the CO2 and the alcohol again, which is really going to help with the gluten structure and the shaping and all of the little, I would say like spider webs that you see in the bread. And something else that I like to do with my yeast rolls, it comes to preference, but also I'm looking for a nice appearance on my yeast rolls. We'll make an egg wash to go on the top. We like to do that after our dough is proofed, right before it goes into the oven, and I'll show you all that process here shortly. All right. So as we can see, our dough has relaxed. It's even kind of puffed up a little bit more in rows. Now we're gonna take and divide our dough out. So I like to take and kind of make a little bit of a rectangle just to cut off the sections a little bit easier. For portioning the dough, I'm going to scale out to about 1 1/4 ounces or about 38 grams, whichever one you prefer to do. Let's see, how close can I get to begin with? Ooh, 1.62. And it kind of is based off of your preference if you want rolls that are a little bit larger or smaller. If it's at 1.3, I'm okay with that. Also, whenever you're working with dough like this, it is not a bad practice to take and have a piece of saran wrap to lay over the top section if it's going to take a little bit longer. This is also a great activity that you can do with little ones because, like I've said before, it's like playing with Play-Doh. It's not edible. I do not recommend at this point putting it in your mouth or trying to consume it. So I'm going to continue to portion all of these out, and then we'll go on to the second step, which is shaping these rolls. I've gotten all of my rolls portioned out. Now begins the rolling process. So there's a few ways and techniques that everybody likes to do this. I'll show you a few different options. Also, I'm going to show you a different shape to utilize as well. So I like to take and do, and the easiest way, in my opinion, to do this, I like to find a nice smooth surface, and then I'm going to take and kind of push it in an outwards motion. So nice smooth surface. Now I'm going to take and turn it over, and I'm going to kind of tuck it up and fold it like a dumpling. So I'm kind of tucking all of the sides in. So right here, we have a nice, smooth, tight surface. From here, you can take multiple ways to do this. You can take, I like to call this the princess wave or prince. You're gonna take and cup your hand over on top. You're going to apply a little bit of pressure right here, which is really gonna help to tighten the structure, and it'll be a nice little perfect ball. So as you can see, it's nice and smooth. So I'm gonna take and place that down. You wanna kind of give these some space. So I would say about 1.5 to 3/4 of an inch. So I like to take, just kind of pinch it up. Now, different shape, I'll take and use my thumb and my pinky, and I'm rolling it back and forth. That way you can truly see the dough tightening up as you're going around in a circle. And if it's not perfect, I promise it takes practice. And if you don't feel like doing that, you can basically just pinch it underneath, tuck all your sides under, and just like this, you still have a nice yeast roll to utilize. I'm gonna go on the opposite side so we can see if there's a little bit of a difference. The technique of doing the little dumpling is just to ensure a nice smooth surface, but it's actually not necessary. Also, if you don't feel like you're getting the shape down while you're rolling it on the counter, you can actually roll in the palm of your hand doing the same technique. So this recipe makes about 32 portions at 1.25 ounces. This yeast roll recipe can also be turned into hamburger buns. So by putting these a little bit closer together, they're perfect for party sliders because you don't have to cut each individual one. With them being closer together, they're one full unit. They're still very easy to portion out and break apart after the sandwich has been made and baked off. You can take and portion. This definitely takes some practice. I'm choosing not to use flour on my work surface as it allows to provide tension with the dough, so it will actually roll up. So I'll show you guys a quick technique or show you what it looks like whenever there's a little too much flour on your work surface. So say I have, which if your dough is slightly sticky, you can use a small amount of flour, but say you have too much flour on your work surface. What's going to happen is the dough is not going to have the same amount of traction because that flour has kind of inhibited that. So the counter and the friction and tension is actually your friend. So I'm trying to round it same shape. I have flour on my hand and it's still not wanting to round. It's just kind of looking like a flat pancake. So if that happens, take your pastry brush, dust as much off as possible. Take and give your hands some good claps. I'm trying to do it away from my section so I don't get flour in that area. Actually, I'm gonna wash my hands real quick. All right, so even if my hands are a little slightly damp, that's actually going to help create the friction necessary and tension to re-round out that dough ball. So on this half sheet tray, you can do about a 4x6, or you could even do a 5x6. So that's looking at between 24 to 30. Yeah. 6 and 4 is 24. Simple math. I'm also going to show you guys a different shape. So we are going to make some knots. So a little bit of a different technique that we're going to use for this. So I'm going to take and kind of press it out to a little bit of a rectangle. Does not have to be a perfect rectangle. From there, I'm going to take and kind of roll and pinch it in. So basically you're making a snake. From here, I'm going to take and just slightly roll it outwards. So this is about 6 inches. So I'd say we're about between 6 and 8 inches. I'm gonna lightly roll it in flour just because my dough is slightly sticky. And whenever it comes to the rolling process, if the dough is really sticky, it makes it really hard. I'm gonna show it like this, and then I'll turn it around so you can see that visual. So what I'm gonna take and do is lay the dough over my index and middle finger right here. I'm gonna wrap it around, open my fingers up like a V, pull that tail under and over, and then I'm going to kind of tighten that knot. From here, you could take and just continue to do that. Or if you have enough, you could take and actually do another knot. So a double knot. And then the main goal is you want to take both of the tail ends and tuck them under and give it a pinch. So you have a nice knot like that. So same technique. You want to kind of push out those air bubbles and air pockets. And the longer you roll your dough out, the more knots that you're going to be able to get. Also, whenever you're rolling out, trying to get an even snake per se, you're going to take and roll in an outwards motion and kind of spread your fingers out. Not necessarily jazz hands, but just a little bit further. So from here, once again, I'm going to take and lay it over my index and middle finger. Roll under and over and pull tight. So once again, you're right here. I like to take and tuck this tail under, pinch them together, and just like that. So I'm gonna continue on with these and get this tray nice and filled up. All right, so I've gotten all these rolls shaped up. I've given them some space for all of them to rise, and while I was shaping these knots, these rolls have actually already began to rise. I'm going to take and do the same trick like before and place it into my oven with some boiling water for them to rise quicker for us. It's been about 30 minutes, so I'm gonna go ahead and take a look at my rolls to see if they are proofed. Let's come take a look. So let's check and see if these are proofed. So a way to tell if they are is if you lightly press on it and it bounces back slowly. So as you can see, pressing against it, whoop, it's bouncing back slow. I'm gonna check these rolls as well. Bouncing back nice and slow. So we're gonna bake these at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So while we wait for that to heat up, I'm actually going to make an egg wash. So what an egg wash does, I'm just gonna crack it directly in. Use a flat surface. So with an egg wash, it's about 1 egg with 1 tablespoon of water. And I'm just gonna use a fork to, as I pour water on the counter, that's okay, easy cleanup. I'm just gonna use a fork to break that up. So what an egg wash does is that the proteins found within the egg help to kind of give it a nice glossy sheen. The egg wash will make your yeast rolls bakery worthy. With an egg wash, you want to make sure the surface is nice and coated, but you also don't want to have an excessive amount as it'll pull at the bottom and give your bread an eggy flavor. Also with bread and yeast rolls, you can do something called overproofing. So what will happen is they'll continue to feed and the flavor will become a little yeasty per se. So whenever I'm doing this, you want to be gentle, but yet you want to be pretty efficient depending on if your oven's ready, if you're just really hungry and somebody's waiting for you to get those yeast rolls out. Whenever you're beginning to egg wash, you're going to take and dip your pastry brush in, Brush it against the side so you kind of get off that excess. You want to be gentle yet effective. Otherwise, we're going to be here for 3 hours. Don't know about you, but I'm ready for some bread. I'm going to leave one of each of these rolls without the egg wash just to see the difference. And the egg wash comes down to preference. I know some people that actually don't do an egg wash, but as soon as the rolls come out of the oven, they brush them with butter, which butter makes everything better. And I'll actually show y'all a butter recipe of mine that I like to serve with my bread. Now with these knots, these would be great. You wouldn't even have to necessarily do the egg wash. As soon as they would pop out of the oven, I would take and throw those into a bowl with your favorite melted garlic butter. Throw some fresh parsley, and then you have some garlic knots, which I don't know about you, but those sound really good. Now also, please be delicate with this, because if you're a little too rough and hard on them, they will actually deflate all of that carbon dioxide that we worked really hard for with letting them rest and taking a break can be released, and then they kind of come out flat. Still just as yummy, but won't have the same airy texture. So as you can see already, based off of that, the difference, how nice and glossy it is. Also at this stage, you could take and top this with poppy seeds, sesame seeds, or whatever topping that you would like, maybe even a little everything bagel. So also with the egg wash, you don't want to brush just directly onto the surface. You want to kind of get the sides. The egg wash does kind of tell on you. In industry, some people actually have spray bottles filled with the egg wash that they can mist and spray for more of an even coating on your rolls. That is the last one. Remember again, I am leaving one unwashed, which you can already see the difference. This one's a very matte or dull finish, as these are nice and shiny. And guess what? Our oven's ready. These rolls are ready to be put into the oven. So they'll take about anywhere between 10 to 12 minutes, depending on your oven. Sweet spot is usually around 12, depending on. Also indicators, you want a nice light golden brown color. And something that I like to do that, depending on your oven, they heat differently, different temperatures in different zones of your oven. I like to take and rotate the pans around, and then depending on how many trays I have, I swap them, so that way everything is cooking nice and even. So let's get these in the oven. So now we're gonna actually take and set a timer for 5 minutes, and we'll do a rotation halfway through that process. And with your egg wash as well, as long as you put it into a container with an airtight lid, you can keep it up to 7 days. So the day that you make it is day 1. So if you make it on a Friday, it's good until next Thursday. While we're waiting, I want to show you guys a quick butter that I like to serve with my yeast rolls. We're gonna do a hot honey butter. So some equipment that you'll need is a rubber spatula, something to mix that butter mixture in. I'm gonna use a scale, set of measuring spoons, and your ingredients, which is hot honey. And I'm using a salted butter. Shout out to Kirkland's. So not only is this butter excellent on yeast rolls, I've actually used it and made some popcorn. It was nice. It was salty sweet with a hint of spice. So I'm measuring out about 4 ounces of salted butter. So I'm gonna go in and actually break up my butter some, just to kind of help make it easier. So this is nice room temperature or softened butter. I've left mine out for a couple of hours, but my house is a little bit warmer. You can also there's multiple tricks to soften butter. Some people take and leave it out overnight. Some people take and put hot water in a glass and then dump the water out and set the glass directly on top. There's multiple ways. Use your imagination. So I'm gonna start with about a tablespoon of hot honey, and this can come down to preference and what your heat level is. We like spice in my house. Make sure and get all of that honey out. And I'm waiting to find a local person for some honey, but hot honey homemade is definitely in the future for me. Because I'm using salted butter, extra salt is not necessary, but once again, it comes down to flavor preference. So I'm just gonna mix this all in. Ooh, look at that color. Scrape everything down from the sides, and when I'm doing, ooh, time to turn those rolls. Oh yeah. So you want to be fairly fast in between rotating and swapping, just because the longer that oven is open, the longer it takes for the temperature to actually get back up to what we have it set for. So I'm going to set another timer for 5 minutes to check on it and see if they're ready or if they need just a little bit longer. Well, let's give this a taste and see if it's where I want it. Small amount to start with. Ooh, that's nice. I think I want a little bit more spice. I'm gonna do about a half of a tablespoon more. I don't know about y'all, but have you tried hot honey on pizza? It's great. It's my husband and I's favorite. Shout out to my boy Skyler, who's on camera crew. One more taste. So did you know a tasting spoon has 2 sides? Top right here, back right there. That way, nobody's double dipping. Oh yeah, that's where it's at. For 4 ounces of butter, I did 1.5 tablespoons of hot honey. Once again, comes down to your preference and your heat level. All right, so my timer just went off again, so let's give it a check. I think they might be ready. Also, my kitchen smells amazing. Oh yeah. So I have these rolls sitting on a trivet right here that you see. It's to allow airflow underneath, and then also we're not putting hot trays directly on our countertops, which is a big no-no. I don't know if your landlord would be too happy about that. All right, so we're gonna let these cool. Fight the temptation. Fight. Wait just a little bit. Otherwise, you're gonna burn your mouth off, which it's kind of worth it. I've resisted the urge to try one. I wanted to try one with you guys. But real quick, I wanted to show y'all after I plated all of these up, I wanted to show you the difference between the egg wash right here and then the one without egg wash. Still nice, beautiful color, doesn't have quite the sheen. So now that we have that, don't worry, it's still gonna taste just as great. I plated up my hot honey butter, so I wanna try one of these puppies. So put some hot honey in there. Remember that if hot honey doesn't float your boat, add whatever inclusions that you want to for butter, or just eat it straight. All right, so let's try this. That's great. Thanks so much for spending your time with me, making some delicious fluffy yeast rolls. This has been Chefy Things. See you next time.